I'm Charles Bennett, lay leader and lay delegate to annual conference. The United Methodist Church might have made more progress on inclusion in the last few days than the previous 34 and a half years of my life. It also continues to update the social principles to advocate doing as much as possible throughout the world. This brings me to a segment I like to call Full Court Press. When we last left off, I had introduced the 2024 General Conference and summarized some of its key issues and the first 2 days. Before we go much further, I also wanted to once more briefly review what regionalization and the Book of Discipline are, because I received questions about them. What regionalization means for the United States is that a large part of the doctrine and priorities of American Methodists would be decided only by American Methodists, and only American Methodists that remained in the United Methodist Church. Once regionalization passes, a Conference of American Methodists will approve the American version of the Book of Discipline. The Book of Discipline are the rules and principles Methodism operates under, dealing not only with general operation and organization, but also statements of principles and beliefs. There's a lot going on in the Book of Discipline, so much so that there's maybe only one person I've ever met who understands it cover to cover. Regionalization essentially saws the Book of Discipline in half. Into one part that applies to all of Methodism and one part that will be different from region to region. Note that for the past few days at General Conference, afternoons have been spent in Legislative Committee, while mornings have been spent in worship and plenary. At plenary, legislation is either approved on the consent calendar or by full floor debate after multiple people have spoken for and against the legislation. Certain types of legislation, such as major structural changes to the church, must receive debate, as must anything that advanced out of committee only narrowly. But smaller stuff that received unanimous or near unanimous support in committee is just added to the consent calendar. On day 3, Thursday, April 25th, Bishop Latrell Easterling preached a powerful message about dismantling inequality of gender and sexuality in the United Methodist Church. Thursday was Thursday in Black to acknowledge victims of violence, abuse, and assault. 4 of the 8 regionalization petitions passed on the consent calendar, and a 5th regionalization petition, a constitutional amendment that needed a supermajority, passed with 78% of the vote, meaning that even if every absent delegate showed up and voted no, it still would have received over 2/3 of the vote. Next, the constitutional amendment will need to be ratified by an aggregate vote of all annual conference delegates in the entire denomination. Oh, cool. I get to vote on that. There is also an important vote to not force mandatory penalties for Book of Discipline violations, meaning it would be more difficult to sanction Methodists who oppose gay marriage. However, the body also allowed the 1,000-ish Methodists in Eurasia and the former Soviet Union to disaffiliate, a process that began long before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Even though that's a vast swath of territory, First UMC Whittier at one time had more Methodists than all of Eurasia did at its exit. Delegates also held a rally for Palestine, urging a ceasefire in partnership with United Methodists for Kairos Response, or UMKR. Retired Bishop Grant Hagaya was among the participants. The UMC Council of Bishops has called for a ceasefire, and Methodism has opposed colonization and settlement of West Bank and Gaza since 1976. The speaker for Day 4 was Bishop Sharma Lewis, an African-American woman from the Mississippi Conference. Delegates received a report from the Connectional Table, a standing committee of the church that coordinates between the various agencies of the church and was a major force in regionalization. There was also an ad for Claremont School of Theology, and communion was served by Bishop Cedric Bridgeforth, our former DS, who is now presiding over the Pacific Northwest Annual Conference. Day 5's message was delivered by a bishop from Zimbabwe, and he spoke about, among other things, preaching in the Tongangara refugee camp. By the way, if it feels like less and less business is getting done, remember that the afternoons were spent in committee, and also that yesterday was Saturday. The revisions to the social principles have been coming to General Conference in piecemeal over the last few days and the next few, some on consent calendar and some on full floor debate. One of the revisions I wanted to look at was sections 164 and 165 of the social principles. A direct quote: "Our involvement in political systems is rooted in the gospel imperative to love our neighbors, to do justice, and to care for the vulnerable. As United Methodists, we acknowledge that love requires responsible political action and engagement aimed at the betterment of society and the promotion of the common good. Do all the good you can, in all the ways you can. Sometimes politics is one of those ways, although Section 164 and 165 are quick to affirm the separation of church and state. The principles reject violence and war as solutions to societal problems. These sections favor restorative justice over incarceration and the death penalty. They reject acts of discrimination and hate violence and urge Methodists to protect a wide variety of minority groups, including gender, sexuality, ethnicity, native language, country of origin, economic disadvantage, disability, and citizenship status. And if you're concerned that this is something new and radical, this is merely a revision of language that already existed in the book. And the original social principles date all the way back to 1908, longer even if you consider the frequent references to the lives and teachings of John Wesley, such as preaching in jails, in sections 164 and 165. Anyway, some of the biggest fights are yet to come. Petitions changing the definition of marriage, allowing self-avowed LGBT clergy, allowing clergy to perform gay marriages, and allowing Methodist funds to go to LGBT-related causes, all made it out of committee and will be debated on the floor or placed on the consent calendar in the coming days. There is a chance that anti-LGBT language could be removed from all books of discipline worldwide this conference. If that doesn't happen, but regionalization passes, the U.S.-only Book of Discipline is likely to remove that exclusionary language. There's a lot to look forward to, so tune in a few days for another episode of Full Court Press.